In this video, we're going to talk about some advanced source mask optimization. It's advanced because we're going to do manual OPC rather than the regular OPC. So here we have a staggered contacts pattern. And the idea is that we want to keep this pattern as rectangles, or we could keep it as ellipses. When we keep it like that, when we want to keep these as just standard rectangles, then we can't do regular OPC. So here's the workflow. The standard OPC workflow is when we start with the GDS-Multi-site, we either load one from a file or we create it from HyperLith. And we need to ensure that there's a target layer and a mask layer. They could be the same layer. You could start your mask from the target. Then what we would do is make the best guess at an optimal source. Then we would dose to size somehow. And then we would do OPC. Then we would do source optimization. And then we would go back and repeat. We would do OPC, source optimization. And then we could continue to do this until we were satisfied that we got a source that was optimal. But in this flow, we're going to do something different. Before I describe this flow, let me just show you what would happen if we were to just use the standard OPC. So here we have a HyperLith loaded with a GDS pattern that is staggered contacts. And we have one unit cell selected, and we have guessed our best source. We just guessed this. We're using EUV rigorous mask model. And when we do OPC here, okay, and then we get a corrected mask pattern that looks like this. Okay, but we want to not do the standard OPC. We want to do manual OPC. So what we'll do is let's look at the flow with manual OPC. We create a pattern with HyperLith and we parameterize the features. For example, we're going to parameterize the length and width of this contact. And then we'll make the best guess of our optimal source, okay, which is right here in the old flow. And then instead of doing OPC, we're going to do manually optimize L and width, the length and width of the feature. Okay, so we'll just make a matrix of cases for length and width, and we'll run HyperLith using the multi-dose trigger feature, and we'll see which combination of length and width give the largest overlapping process window by area. So let's go to HyperLith here. So here we have used the staggered contacts pattern. Now you can set up your own pattern and parameterize what you want. You could, for example, make these ellipses instead of rectangles. Here we've parameterized the X bias and the Y bias. So we've set up a matrix of cases. We're going to run X bias from -4 to +8, and the Y bias also from that same range, -4 to +8. We've set these as trigger variables, which means that when we dose to size, we'll get a different dose to size for each combination of X bias and Y bias, which is what we want to do. So when we do that and we dose to size here, find nominal threshold, that's thresholding to size. We don't have a resist model, so we're just thresholding to size, and we're done. So we have a bunch of aerial images. We have aerial images through focus and through X bias and through Y bias. So let's just look at one aerial image. Here we'll just use the best focus, X bias 0, Y bias 0, the nominal case. And measure. We see that that's 26 because we anchored there. We thresholded to size there. And this is 23. Our mask pattern wants this one to be 26. So we're on target because that's where we anchored. And then 20 is this metrology point here. Fem and process window And let's look at, let's put site on one plot for now and just look at the x bias, y bias case of 0. And if we show the process window for each case, we see that they're not overlapping very well. This is the x dimension of the contact, the width, and this is the height. So you have a small overlap. So when we show the overlapping process window, they don't overlap very well. And so we're going to use the area of this overlapping process window as a metric for what values of x bias and y bias are good. So we don't need to plot that for every case. This can be computed for us. So we can compute the area of the overlapping process window. So we put site on the overlapping process window. We'll do a matrix plot x, matrix plot y. So we're going to get a matrix plot of a bunch of numbers for the overlapping elliptical process window area for every value of x bias and y bias. Let's make the screen bigger so we can see this. And so when we have x bias of 0 and y bias of 0, the overlapping process window area is only about 3. But over here, we have a maximum when the x bias is 4 and the y bias is -3. Our overlapping process window is the highest right here. Okay, let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's plot the all metrology points Femin process window, and we'll do it for x bias of 4 and y bias of -3. Okay, so now we have this is our best case. It has the largest overlapping process window by area, which is 12.655. Okay, so we found our optimal. This is our manual OPC step that we've done. Okay, so we've guessed our source as annular. We've done a manual optimization, not very manual, it was using all the power of HyperLith, to compute the optimum length and width, in our case the bias, x bias and y bias for the contact. Now the next part is we need to convert this to a GDS multi-site pattern, because the source optimization requires a target layer and a mask layer, and it requires us to have a GDS multi-site mask pattern. So this is a little bit tricky here. The way we're going to do this is we're going to create two cases here. A case where they're both 0, and in this case, this gives us our target. And then we're going to take a case where we have 4 and -3. And we'll clear all the other cases here. Okay, now if we don't do anything different, we're going to get 4 cases when we only want 2 cases. You'll see why we're doing this in a minute. We're doing this so that we can create a target layer, and so if I put a case variable here and I lock this and lock this, then I don't get a matrix of cases. Whenever case variable is 0, I get these two, and when case variable is 1, I get these two. So now what we're going to do is do a GDS export. So I'm going to say File, Export, gazillion. So, and the important thing here is that we put case on different layers. Rather than side by side in the same layer, we want on different layers. That way one is the target and one is the first mask. So when we do this, now we have to play around here. We got clear here and absorber here. That's the right polarity. And if you look closely, well, you have to set the target, the mask layer to this one, and the target layer to the first one. So that's case equals 0, and this is case equals 1 here. Okay, case equals 0 and case equals 1. So now you can see the target layers in the outlines, these little black lines here. That's the target, and that's our mask. Now we can do source optimization. So from here, we're going to want to optimize the source. And this is the setup for the source. I've got no polarization because this is EUV. I've got, this is a minimum pupil fill of 0.1 and a maximum intensity of 5. And I want X symmetry. I don't want octant symmetry, and I don't need Y symmetry because there's already symmetry broken for EUV. We only need X symmetry. And the target pattern has rounding because we need to give it a realistic target. It's unrealistic to round to try to target a perfect rectangle. Characteristic CD is 20. That's the minimum CD that we see. And we have a tolerance of 10. And then if we hit OK, it's going to optimize the source for us. Okay, it's going to run a bunch of simulations. And then it's, in this case, it's using SimRunner. And then it's going to run a computation to optimize the source. Okay, and in this case, it gives us something like this. So that's the optimum source it found with those settings. The next thing we might want to do is, if that worked, we might want to increase the maximum focal range, and we could also try to increase the pupil fill a little bit. To increase the pupil fill, we decrease the maximum intensity. It was previously, it was 5, and now we have it as 2. This will cause the pupil fill to increase. So now we have a larger pupil fill. And we could just simulate right here because we already have this pattern which is set up. We could simulate and calculate our area. And now we're at 16.217. So that's higher than it was. Remember, we were at 12 in the previous simulation when we did manual OPC and we plotted that process window area. Remember, the maximum was 12, and now we're at 16. So this source is a better source than the other source. This was showing what we got for the best case was 12.655 for the combination of X bias and Y bias. But now with the optimized source, we have a larger area of 16. Now what we can do is export this source. Okay, so the source is here. This is our optimum source. Okay, we also saw it in the live view here. Oh, this is not updated. This is updated here. So what we can do is say File, Export, the stepper model illumination source. Format for Hopkins, we'll say no, and we'll call this one best source. I've already done this, so I'll just call this best source 1B. Okay, now what we want to do is do the manual OPC again with that. So we go back, we'll load step 1 here. This is where we had the manual OPC set up where we run through X bias and Y bias. But this time we're going to customize the stepper model and load a pupil map source. So we say pupil map illumination, and then we go to the table here and we load the source that we just exported. we see that that one wants to see 20 pixels in the X direction, 20 samples and the half axis in the X and Y directions here. And now what we're going to do is run through bias and see which bias with this new source is the best. So we run simulate. We're using SimRunner. It doesn't have to redo the trig simulations because they're still there. It's just changed the source. We need to rerun the threshold to size for the new source. And after that's done, we're going to calculate the process window for all combinations of X bias and Y bias with the new source. And then here's the process window, the overlapping process window area. And we'll see if some other combination of X bias and Y bias is better now that we have the optimized source. And we'll know if we have a larger area. Yes, you can see here that 17.9, that was bigger than what it was before. We could change now to 6, X bias to 6, and Y bias to -4. So let's look at what that process window looks like. And that's a much bigger process window. So we could repeat this process again. So we could convert this now, where we're at 6 and -4 is our new mask. Convert it to GDS-Multi-site. Okay, and then optimize the source again. So this optimized source, as you saw, could be exported, and then that could be used in other simulations, like for the periphery of this pattern, or you could export to TCCs and use it in full chip. And keep in mind that this was a rigorous mask model. This was rigorous using trig. So to summarize, we created a pattern with HyperLith. We parameterized that pattern. We took a best guess, which was just annular for an optimal source. We did kind of a manual OPC. This was an optimization of the length and the width of the contact. Then we converted it to a GDS multi-site, ensuring that we had a target and a mask pattern. In this case, they were different. Those were on different layers. We used the gazillion export feature to do this. Once we had that done, we did a source optimization, and then we exported that source and brought it back in, and then we went back to step 3, where we did a manual optimization of length and width again. And then we found that we have a larger process window after our source optimization and after a subsequent optimization of L and W. And we could repeat this.